Cineboys to Cinnamon, episode 25.
25. There we go.
Actually
Nice
halfway
round
to
number.
50.
Yeah. I was going to make that joke.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, man.
Halfway to 52. There we go.
Continuing with our double bill of recordings for Barbenheimer.
Yes.
We're all sort of sweaty after spending a good hour and a half talking about Oppenheimer. Now we're going to hopefully not get as sweaty talking about Barbie, because that would be strange. But, I think it's a really fascinating film in the sense it takes us to topics that have not really previously spoken about in Cineboys to Cinnamon. So,
definitely.
The Barbie property is a doll, which is a toy. It gives us the opportunity to talk about toys in cinema and toy films, and sort of the themes and ideas that tend to sort of permeate around those kinds of films. As it's Greta Gerwig in the director's chair, it gives us an opportunity to talk about her work, which is always personally for me a joy. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then, of course, Barbie itself, which is a film I didn't expect to have the impact it has.
Oh my God, it's everywhere at the moment.
Everywhere, but in a way that's totally different to any other film I can think of in recent memory.
Oh yeah. I mean, like Titanic. Everyone was talking about Titanic, and when that came out, I mean, I don't remember. I was only 3, but like, I don't think it'll make as much money. But it's just crazy how that it can kind of envelope such a broad.
I love that'd be like your first memory of being alive, just hearing people talk about Titanic.
Yeah. But yeah, no, there's definitely a kind of a social spike in talking about cinema in general, largely as a result of Barbie, which is really interesting. And like you say, something I didn't expect either.
No,
so,
we'll get into that in more detail later on when we discuss the film. But first, I think we should talk about toy films, which we'll do after the outro finishes now.
Which is now.
Questing the cinematic void.
Right, the toy movie. I mean, I don't know. That's not really a subgenre that I don't think, but just for the sake of discussion, that's what I'm going to keep calling it.
I think there is. I think off the top of my head, you got obviously the classic one being Toy Story. You mentioned Toy Soldiers to me earlier. Transformers.
Oh,
odd one. Like Hasbro. So in a similar vein that like Mattel are semi-producing Barbie, Hasbro are heavily involved in Transformers development. So
Transformers. We'll definitely talk about that because that'd be
that'd be interesting.
I put out a little post on our Instagram as is tradition, just to sort of get a sense of the kind of like beloved toy films that people wanted us to talk about, and it actually follows some of the films we wanted to talk about anyway, which is always nice.
Oh, there you go. Nice.
Story mentioned by Jordana. Incredibly clever and original idea at the time. Yeah, agree.
Yeah,
we'll definitely talk about that in that context.
Yeah.
The Small Soldiers, which might be my favourite example.
Okay.
I was one of the first kids in Derby to see that film. I won a competition and I went to go and see it. So
I remember you mentioning that. Yeah, that's crazy. That's so good. What a claim to fame.
I know, yeah. Best thing that's ever happened. Alex, again, Phil Mangle. Yeah, get out of our DMs, you dirty little swine. The Lego Movie, which...
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
Which I hadn't considered. I've only seen about half of it, which I think might be a bit of a crime, considering that this is... Well, arguably, it's one of the more sort of beloved examples of this sort of genre we've just come up with. But
there are some similarities plot-wise. Almost, Barbie and the Lego Movie share some DNA, which I'll get into later.
Okay.
I don't actually think it's. I think it's slightly too similar, but there we go.
Okay.
Will Ferrell's in both films, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
The most striking similarity.
Yeah.
So the toy film, then, I guess, in the sort of context of talking about toy movies, we're either talking about films that have toys in, obviously, or films that are based on a toy property. I guess we can kick off with Small Soldiers, if you don't mind.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, go for it.
I think the reason I want to sort of talk about this film first, primarily in relation to Barbie, is this idea that there is a property which is fundamentally for children. In the case of Small
Yeah,
Soldiers, the property is created for the film Small Soldiers, so obviously there's a difference there. But
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
similarity in the sense that there's like a thematic depth which is more appropriate for adults.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
And in the
yeah.
context of Small Soldiers, it's in the over militarization of children's toys. Uh,
Okay, so like Action Man, for example, and
yeah,
even the Little Army Men and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's this idea that of making violence, military action, or military figureheads sort of more palatable and subsequently more sort of entertaining, and sort of
Mm,
stripping away the sort of the horror and nuance of conflict in place of this sort of like the sort of abject heroism, the physical strength
yeah.
and prowess, the necessity for combat. And I think Joel Dante doesn't get as much credit as he should for weaving those ideas into what is essentially a sort of, on face value, a sort of fairly solid 90s, or is it 90s? I think it is
1998.
98.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew you'd
Mm.
know. Sort of
Yeah.
piece of sort of family entertainment. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. As you know, it's
Yeah.
not something I'd really considered until I quite recently was just, do you know when you just remember a film and think, God, I like that film, and you sort of go down a
Yeah.
bit of a rabbit hole. I sort of stumbled across a few sort of academic discussions and Joel Dante interviews where he talks about this idea of
Yeah.
militarization of toys, and how, you know, there's a concern that it sort of sows the seeds for sort of enthusiasm for future conflict almost.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. No, I see that. I see what you're saying there. I think the problem is, if you're going to market toys to boys, especially in the 90s, what I don't really know what else you'd lean on. It's a shame, but like it's when you're out with your mates in the woods, what do? You pretend you got guns, right? And you
Yeah.
kind of say like, yeah, bang, 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 bang. And maybe I don't know whether that's the fault of the toys or whether that's the marketing team behind the creation of those toys noticing that natural behavior in kind of in men, or not men yet, but in like in the sort of the male, and the sort of growing up in that fashion and responding to that.
Mm,
But I think Small Soldiers is a really good example of sort of analyzing that idea, really. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, looking back, it's completely accurate as well. If you want to talk about gender stereotypes, you look no further than things like Action Man and things like like the sort of the little green soldiers you used to play with army men.
mm.
And there's not an awful lot more there, really. I'm trying to think. Maybe Scale Electric, but even then, the delight was quite often when they crashed, right? So there's still
Yeah,
a violent element there.
yeah,
Um, Warhammer, like Battleship, the game, the kind of, a lot of board games are sort of military as well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I mean, yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, I know it's a sort of a source of very modern debate at the moment as to, you know, is it ingrained in certain genders to sort of to gravitate towards certain things, and I want to sort of stay away from that because I don't know anywhere near enough about that. But I think, I think in the context of, I think Dante's point is perhaps more about this sort of enthusiasm for conflict,
Yeah.
toys as almost sort of like propaganda,
Mm,
things that, make conflict, no matter how questionable, more palatable in the sort of hearts and minds of the masses, who have been
yeah,
indoctrinated
yeah.
from an early age by the presence of toys like Major Chip Hazard and the Commando Elite, who, driven by rampant, corporate greed, have been rather ridiculously given a military grade weapon chip that gives these toys sentience. Um, again, we sort of talk about this in our Atomic Monsters element of the Oppenheimer episode we literally just finished recording. But the idea, you gravitate towards the most extreme examples to make the most powerful point. And I think in the case of Joel Dante's Small Soldiers, there's something to be said there about this idea of these sort of incredibly intelligent, sophisticated toys gaining sentience and then sort of enacting that Although with a sort of strict sort of programming, they do have programming to destroy the Gorgonites, who are these sort of bumbling, hapless, sort of quite peace-loving, odd-looking fellas. But for some reason, they've done something, and they have to be annihilated.
That's right.
And I think that's a sort of more chilling element, actually. On the
That's
basis
true.
that,
Actually,
it's
kind of like what was that? Fucking Starship Troopers situation, isn't it?
yeah,
A little bit.
yeah,
and like these bugs haven't necessarily we don't really know what they've done wrong.
yeah.
And yet you're conditioned to believe they're the enemy. Which I didn't think about that actually.
It's also sort of speaks this idea about the sort of encouragement of this, this idea that strength is aggression. Kindness is sort of is feeble and undesirable, and that the Gorgonites seem to embody that, and that's why they have to be destroyed. Their crime is almost that they're inept. They're not prepared for conflict in any way, and that's almost their biggest crime.
Yeah. They got to be stamped out.
Yeah, because they're some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of plastic Darwinism or something. I don't know. It's strange. But no, I just thought it was worth mentioning that film in that context, because to me, not only is it very significant for me as a child growing up, but it's a film that's sort of endured, and it's a film that I will revisit fairly regularly and have genuine reverence for. Not just because of the memory, but of the themes that I sort of discovered in my sort of research conducted in the early hours of a random morning when I should have been asleep.
Oh, okay.
Many years ago.
That's fascinating. That it's definitely kind of garnered, because a few people have mentioned Small Soldiers to me quite recently, actually. So clearly the Barbie thing is kind of reinvigorated at someone, and it does have a definite kind of cult following. I mean, Joe Dante is brilliant at that. I think he's, did he do Gremlins?
He did.
I'm fairly sure that was him. Yeah. So he's got that kind of mainstay appeal, even though initially I don't think Small Soldiers, I think it made money. I think it made about just under 100 million. But it does, there's something to be said about his filmmaking. It's there to stay, and you can revisit them and with a certain warmth.
Yeah, agreed. I'm interested to know what your views are on Transformers, because I find it crazy I didn't even consider Transformers. That is similar in the sense that it is a very popular property brought over to the big screen. And has been here for a very long time. It sort of won't die, will it, Transformers?
No. Oh, God, no. I mean, the first 3 or 4 were tremendously successful financially. My thoughts on the franchise as a whole is, I remember the first one came out and thinking I was going to hate it, and kind of did. I was just about old enough not to kind of buy into its kind of boyishness. And then the next lot came out, and I revisited the first one, and I was like, you know what? I'd seen a video about Michael Bay and his filmmaking, and how there's a kind of element of the auteur there, and I rewatched it, and I was like,
I'd seen that
actually
video.
All right.
Yeah.
I revisited Transformers. I was like, as a film, as a blockbuster, it sort of works, and it's got a clear beginning, middle, and end. There's some dazzling for 2007. The visual effects are out of this fucking world, really good. In the context of it being, it's odd to me that it's all about it stemmed from toys. I think there's a departure in Transformers that isn't present in Barbie and isn't present in something like Toy Story, which has it has like Mr. Potato Head and a couple of actual toys, like real world toys in it, I think, that were like the Slinky and stuff that were around before. But Transformers deviates away from the original design so much that it becomes its own thing, and it kind of becomes like, because the origin of these, they're like aliens, aren't they? They're like mechanical, like ancient aliens. And
I think
I think it's it definitely departed quite significantly from what the original toys did. Which, I mean, all they did was, it was a car, and then it becomes a robot, and it's kind of, there's a kind of Rubik's Cube mechanical edge to them. And the only thing the films could retain was the transformations of those of the toys, which were, kind of clunky and impressive. But there's a definite, sorry, I've gone going on about Transformers for far too long. But Yeah, there's a departure there, which was necessary, although slightly baffling, because it's very pro-military. I think
Yeah,
Transformers.
yeah.
Uh,
Michael Bay very much is pro.
yeah,
He's very
yeah,
his films. I think particularly not only are they sort of drenched in sort of like that sort of like wanky.
yeah,
The smell of Transformers is like a 14-year-old's bedroom. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? It's like
yeah, completely,
it's
yeah.
just like that sort of vinegary sort of smell. It's like, how does it smell like this? But you're not. What are you doing in here?
Yeah, you
Um,
get there's a slight aroma of right guard, but it's not covering anything up.
no, no, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It sort of fuses with like what's it dust that sort of hangs heavy in the air. You know,
yeah, yeah.
uh, and it's sort of like he's appeasing all of those sort of like base teenage boy impulses in his
Mm,
films. That sort of, and not that teenage boys are can't think about things in a degree of nuance, but it's a very horny
yeah,
movie. It's a very
yeah,
action packed movie, and there's almost this
yeah,
fusion of action and horniness, which is more
yeah,
the more
yeah.
troubling when you consider the sort of military aspect.
Oh
Um,
God, yeah, yeah, completely.
yeah, very bizarre collection of films. The only one I sort of didn't dislike was Bumblebee. Uh,
Oh yeah, that was quite sweet. That had again. I'm going to say it, nostalgic. Yeah, there's a
yeah,
nostalgia to that
yeah,
one, and actually that there was less of a departure from the toys and what the toys sort of represented. Um, I never really personally played with them, but I think that kind of brought it back to the sort of the childlike nature
mm,
of those toys. Whereas Michael Bay was, like you say, very keen to dig his heels into the pubescent audience,
mm.
and Bumblebee wasn't as concerned with that, and it is a better film for it. I do agree. Yeah,
It's sort of narrative. Obviously, the film is set in the 80s, and there's this sort of conscious narrative. Sorry, it's conscious in the narrative of the film in the sense that it has this sort of like childlike wonderment to it. That, I mean, obviously it's watered down. It's not it's not the same as the best examples from the era that it's trying to ape, but
yeah,
it definitely channels some of that energy, and it feels a little
mm,
bit more socially conscious.
yeah,
With the sort of John Cena's arc about this sort of resurrection from this sort of like, his sort of transformation from this sort of straight laced military type to someone that grows a sense of understanding and empathy.
mm,
Um, Again, rushed, but it's a blockbuster movie. What are you going to do?
yeah, yeah.
There's something a little bit more to that film as opposed to just sort of like,
Mm.
um, sort of being seamany.
Yeah, 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 definitely.
Yeah.
um,
Toy Story.
Toy Story, yeah. I love Toy Story. Who doesn't? I mean, for a start, from a visual effects perspective, which is something I'm kind of keenly interested in, it was a benchmark, um, and the fact that it was used to such a wonderful for such a wonderful basic but almost universal story about growing up effectively. I'm talking more about the trilogy here, but I just imagine being sort of 8 years old or 6 to 8 years old, I suppose, and having the idea that your toys, when you leave them, come alive. I mean,
Mm,
just a brilliant message, and the fact that they made it accessible for adults as well, which up until that point wasn't. It was one of the first films to do that, where like you drag your kids along to the cinema to watch a kids movie, and you get surprised. I feel like that was the first film to really do that, and Pixar have done nothing. I mean, more recent years, their output, I think, has grown a little bit more uneven, but it was definitely just the start of something really special for children's. A strange phrase to use, children's cinema. Yeah, and in terms of the toy thing, it was largely yeah, just a real gem, and I think that's almost that's not controversial to say that.
no, I think the reason it worked for sort of children and parents alike is because the idea that toys come alive is something that endures. And we talk about
Yeah,
that childlike sense of wonderment, which is so central
yeah,
to the best children's films. I
yeah,
think within the premise alone, Toy Story already achieves that. And
yeah,
what it does, certainly from 1 to 3, I mean, 2 is my personal favorite, but what it does throughout that is that it sort of challenges that childlike sense of wonderment by having the
Yeah.
toys almost watch their kid grow up alongside them,
Yes. Yeah.
and having to adapt to the challenges that come with that as toys, as vessels to facilitate the sort of like boundless imagination of a child, to then sort
Yeah.
of like residing in the deepest, darkest pits of a box because Andy's grown up and he's wanking and watching Transformers now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And the DNA of that very idea is present in a lot of other films about toys as well. I mean, including Barbie. It's not as much of a theme, but it is an idea that's portrayed in Barbie to a certain extent. The idea of not getting played with has ramifications on the characters, and even again in the Lego movie, it's a similar. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there's an idea in the second half of that film, a translation of what is going on in the plot to what is happening in real life. There's kind of a bridge between the real world and the world of the toys. And that idea gets explored, and it all started with Toy Story. And I mean, Barbie does it differently to Toy Story. The Lego movie does it differently to Toy Story, but it is it's weird that that's kind of been, I would say, stolen from Toy Story a little bit. That plot device.
Well, yeah, it's this sort of idea. I think that toys are reflective of shifts in culture. And I think if you think about the opening of Toy Story, it's cowboys, then it's space.
Yes.
And I think,
Oh, no,
Barbie deals with that transition in a really interesting way as well. This idea that how the Barbie is supposed to represent the aspirations of the then modern woman of the time, and how each iteration is emblematic of that change.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it's I think they take those ideas from other toy movies, as you said, Lego movie, which I can't speak too much on, but I can sort of half remember from the point I got to thinking maybe that's where it's going. I don't know if memories like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah,
this idea that they represent change, and that change can not just be the change of a child growing up, but also their taste changing to suit the sort of shifts in history, or the sort of the change of social consciousness, or the social fabric that is then represented in what children consume.
Yeah, that's interesting. That, I mean, we were talking very recently, but in our previous podcast, about the way history influences cinema, and the same could probably be said of toys.
Yeah, and I think Toy Story handles that really, really well. And I think
I didn't think about that, the cowboy and then the space age. That's quite, yeah.
And the sense
I have read that before, but
the sense of bitterness that creates as well, like the bitterness
yeah.
in the old guard, the toys that once were the popular toys. In Toy Story 2, that's very much the point. And I guess the sort of arc of Woody is within that, is being outdated. Sort of analog in a digital world almost, even though it doesn't really apply because they're all toys. But the idea of being being no longer relevant, which I think Barbie handles really quite well as well in its narrative. It's a bizarre segue, but we're going to move over to Greta Gerwig's filmography now.
Yes.
Because I think, obviously Barbie is the property of Mattel, who are obviously a corporate behemoth in their own right. Cinema rights owned by Warner Brothers, who are also a corporate behemoth in their own right. But I think, and we're going to get into that, I put a question out on Instagram regarding that, which I think got some really interesting responses about.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Yeah.
But, I think what Gerwig does really well is she threads a lot of her themes from her filmography, not just as a writer and director, but as an actor as well. And a lot of the choices that she's made in the portrayal of her characters, or the creation or direction of the characters that she's given. I think she threads it quite well into what is a huge movie in Barbie in terms of the investment. So it seems appropriate to sort of talk through a few of her films and a few of those themes and ideas. I wondered if you wanted to take a shot.
All right then. Well, I'd like to talk about Little Women, which is a film I actually really quite admired and enjoyed. It's actually a remake, and Hannah, my wife, she got me to watch the original.
Oh yeah,
right afterwards, because she prefers the original. It's got Christian Bale in it, and it's funny how similar they are, but something about Gerwig's version which I sort of preferred it kind of, there's a sort of almost slightly magical quality to her films that
Agreed.
not overtly at all, but there's a definite sort of sense that you're experiencing almost a slight fairy tale, and you're being told a story by someone that she kind of less so in Ladybird, perhaps. That's a bit more sort of I thought Ladybird was a bit more kind of Oscar-y.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, I did like it a lot. I remember it slightly less, but yeah, the way she kind of presents her narratives, I think there's definitely a slight kind of magical quality to her films. What do you think about Little Women? Have you seen it?
I have.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I desperate need of a rewatch. I actually had it earmarked for rewatch today, but didn't get a chance. But
Okay. Yeah, it's like a storybook.
yeah, it is, and I think it talks to Gerwig's sort of sensibilities as a filmmaker, and I think it's something you can see in Ladybird as well, which is this
Mm.
sort of way in which she embeds the growth of her characters into the narratives.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah.
it's never in a way that is. It's not especially the growth isn't always seismic. It's the growth that comes with getting older, or sort of reflecting on an experience, and the spaces between those moments that seem to really inform the growth of the characters. I really admire that about her as a filmmaker in general, that she has the obviously she confronts the big moments head on. I mean, in Lady Bird, for example, there's arguments, very sort of standard, not
Mm.
standard, but how you stereotypical arguments
Yeah. Yeah. Of
that have
course.
sort of been done to death in cinema, but they're done in a way that any woman can reflect back on their time as a teenage girl and say, yes,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what it's like. And that feels weird for me to say that, because obviously I can't say that,
No. 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 Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to some people that have kind of. I mean, it's today especially. I've got a quote. I've got a big kind of section of opinion from someone at work who really, really loves Greta Gerwig, and she kind of echoed that same sentiment. I'll read it out properly later,
Yeah, I'm looking
but no,
forward to
yeah,
that.
I think you're right. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Because I think you mentioned this earlier. It's not sort of lost on us that it's just two
Two men.
sweaty film nerds trying to sort of unpack
Yeah.
the sort of the feminine qualities, the feminine experience
Yeah.
that Gerwig
Exactly.
portrays. So yeah, it's important that we have that perspective.
I really did think it was. I was like, I really need to get someone else's take, someone female,
Yeah.
because largely Greta Gerwig. That's a big theme for her in a lot of her films. She kind of she really wants to channel and portray the experience of growing up as a woman, and portray it not just to a female audience either. I
No.
think Barbie is, it is definitely for men as well, and it's really interesting that she does carry that across with a graciousness,
Mm.
and a kind of it's almost it's untainted by anything extreme. There's the feminist edge to it, but it's not aggressive.
No.
I think.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that's the
Mm.
same for a lot of her movies. She picks her moments to be very critical of masculine characters. I
Mm.
think in Ladybird, Timothy Chalamet is that sort of like vacuous.
Oh
Which is,
yeah, perfectly
yeah,
cast. Yeah.
perfectly cast. Yeah, that vacuous little
Yeah.
twerp who, his brain's always somewhere else. It's in, he's cultivating this sort of. It's a deliberate persona. It's artifice. It's this sort
Yeah.
of like, the sort
Yeah.
of the quiet academic whose brain is too
Mm.
besieged by loftier thoughts than the trifles
Yeah.
of women, but still
Yeah.
definitely wants to have sex with women. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then,
Yeah. Massively hypocritical.
yeah,
Yeah.
but and I think that she's brilliant in that, in doing that, in sort of bringing those criticisms, letting them flare up with quite a bit of intensity, but they
Mm.
die away in a way that is sort of, they have a lasting impact on the film, and in Lady Bird's case, on her character.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
not like fiercely and staunchly anti men,
No.
which I think is sort of really admirable, given that the temptation to do that must be quite strong in films
Yeah.
about
Yeah. Completely.
the sort of experience. But there's a scene
Mm.
for me that really stands out, and we talk about the sort of universal appeal of Gerwig's work. Obviously, you know women reflecting on growing up are going to be able to connect with the film on a deeper level.
Yeah.
Obviously, not every film can be for you, right? But you can,
No,
and that's
yeah,
I think a really key and important point to take into the discussion about Barbie, which we will do. But but you can still derive as much of enjoyment from watching on the sidelines, and acknowledging the bits that are sort of addressed to you in a way.
Yeah.
But I think it's just this scene where she's driving back through her hometown and she's looking at her hometown with fondness after she comes back from university, and it really made me think about the complex relationship we all have with our hometowns.
Yeah. Oh,
Like,
yeah,
like as
completely.
a teenager, the only thing you want to do is get the fuck out of there, because it's like the sort of, particularly if you've come from a small town, or you spent most of your formative years in a small town, long enough for it to feel like a hometown.
Yeah.
It's like this place of oppression. It's like it's sort of stunting your sort of like
Desire to travel
yeah
and
to grow,
broaden your mind.
stunting
Yeah,
growth,
exactly.
and then you get away, and then you come back, and it shows a development in you and a growth in you that. And again, this isn't for everyone. Some people are more than happy to leave where they come from and never go back, which is also fine. But I feel like whenever I talk to people about their relationship with their hometown, it almost sort of comes full circle. They're sort of, it shows like a development of growth to them, that they can sort of appreciate the things about their hometown that made them who they are. How important it was that teenage impulse to break away is to coming full circle. And
exactly.
it's a really sort of quietly observed moment by Gerwig. And I just think, again, I've sort of said this earlier, but it really, her ability to sort of pick on those quiet moments and really linger on them in a way that is really meaningful, I think is as powerful as her sort of upfront engagements with some of the more sort of overt messages that she wants to sort of broach to her audience.
No, yeah, just to kind of echo that same scene, there's definitely a sense you get from that scene that she has started to become almost self-critical, which is something that I think, once you leave your the place where you grew up, you start to realize actually the kind of feelings that you had towards your hometown were more you than the actual town. And you come back and you start to realize, like, oh well, maybe it was me that was the problem, and maybe obviously it wasn't a place that was kind of acting as a jail cell. It helps to leave, but it was all kind of internal, and I kind of got that feeling from that scene. I remember that scene. Actually, it was a great little moment.
Yeah. She's also really great at
Cool.
playing characters in periods of arrested development. Like when I think about Frances Ha, she plays this sort of someone that's life has just stopped. And she's sort of just trying to find something to grab hold of that can get her life moving again.
Yeah.
Is such a relatable theme for anyone, certainly of our the stage we're in our lives, where you sort of leave behind the recklessness of your teen years, and the sort of lingering teen feeling of invincibility you have into your sort of mid-20s, and then all of a sudden you've sort of got to start making these decisions. Society's pushing you to make these decisions. And it's Frances Ha is sort of a like a sort of standard bearer of people that are just like that moment really throwing them off guard, and really sort of leaving them in a period of stasis and not being quite able to reconcile with it, and then subsequently find something that will help them and move them forward in life. She's so brilliant at playing those characters as well, I think.
Completely.
As an actress. I think she co-wrote Frances Ha. Did she not? I think she did. Did she? I think she.
Yes, she did co-write Frances Ha. Yeah.
So yes, sorry, she co-wrote it with Noah Baumbach, who's obviously a co-writer on Barbie as well. And I love that collaboration between them. There seems to be a real, I don't know, like I can't speak to the quality of their relationship, but my mate tells me, like there seems to be a real warmth between them, and a sort of
it's a symbiosis. I feel like
a symbiotic relationship.
Just really,
unafraid to go to places which may make one of them look a bit twatty, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah. Oh, completely. Yeah. No, and that's really admirable and very honest. And it does just sort of speak to the idea of always suffering for your art, because it must be embarrassing if, like, a character which is semi based on you gets shit on,
Yeah.
and the ability to kind of move past that and see it as a painting or a piece of art, or obviously a movie. It's like, yeah, really admirable, and something which doesn't happen enough,
No.
I don't think,
Absolutely.
is that honesty. And yeah, really nice and refreshing to see that.
Barbie, then.
Barbie,
Uh,
yes.
do you know when I sort of first found out that Greta Gerwig was involved? It's
Yeah.
strange because even though I've always been a huge fan of her work, I
Mm.
sort of thought this is going to be the one that undoes her. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, really? Yeah, no, completely.
We talked
Yeah.
about it a couple of episodes ago about this idea of, I think we're talking about Chloe Zhao with the Eternals. You've got filmmakers who are quietly sort
Yeah.
of working in the independent scene, making these really impactful independent films that speak to, the ideas of womanhood or identity, or whatever, and then they jump into the big blockbuster realm where the expectations are raised, some of the freedoms
Yeah.
may not that you enjoy in the sort of independent space are no longer there. Um,
Yeah.
and I just felt that it would be the undoing of her, like a big franchise
Mm.
movie, because so you will about this
Yeah.
film. Like, even if she does a pretty admirable job of wresting control from these sort of corporate behemoths, and just
Yeah.
managed to tell a pretty candid and earnest story. I couldn't help but at the beginning of hearing about this think, nah, this is gonna be something that isn't gonna work.
Completely, yeah. I do remember being baffled by the fact that because initially, because there's loads of animated Barbie movies which are geared much towards the audience that would play with the
Mm.
dolls. This really isn't. This is a 12A, which surprised me as well. And yeah, it's interesting how well she comes off, and how well the film's doing is just extraordinary. And yeah, I agree with you. I was just like really confused that this was, that creative force would delve into something so yeah, mainstream, and not necessarily popular either. It's a theme that they actually touch on in the films, that the idea of the Barbie doll, being a kind of stereotypical heroin chic, I think. Or how do they say it? Is it heroin
Yeah,
chic?
okay.
I don't know. Yeah, like that kind of, yeah, ultra thin, unrealistic standards of beauty. That's what kind of Barbie has come to represent in recent years. And for for film to be made about that doll in this era, it was confusing to me as
I
well.
think
Yeah.
it's interesting because that seems to be one of the central cruxes of the film, alongside many others. This idea
Mm.
that the studios, sorry, not studios, but corporations are rushing to sort of adopt this sort of more socially conscious stance, only with a view to
Yes. Yeah.
maximise sales. And what I think
Yeah.
Gerwig did quite well with the casting and the sort of perhaps quite overt criticisms, but I think successful criticisms of this idea that yes, we have like a more sort of multicultural roster of Barbie dolls. We have Barbie dolls that are presidents and stuff, but the main Barbie is still this, like this
Yeah.
icon of beauty, this sort of completely
Yeah.
unattainable icon of beauty. And I think that she does quite well to sort of play with that. And I think that's something that I'd be interested to see how she managed to get those ideas through, like
Mm.
through the sort of studio heads. I have a few ideas relating more to perhaps a more cynical angle of me a little bit regarding the sort of messages of the film, and who really stands to gain from these films. But we'll save that
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
I've got some good feedback from the adoring listeners on that.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think at least on face value, and I think even beyond face value, I think the film works really well as a sort of a dig at that sort of like frenzy to appease the sort of the more sort of socially conscious landscape, and doing so in a way that
Yeah.
perhaps isn't really as as meaningful as it could be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely not as genuine as they kind of make it out to be,
Yeah,
for sure. Like, there's a great gag in it in which a bunch of board members are talking about how how well they know women and how like the idea of being feminine is so important to them, and they're just all blokes. I loved that joke. I thought that was really funny, really clever, really simple, and could be understood by a really broad
Yeah.
audience, a broad range of people, but it just worked. I thought that was a really great way of putting across that
And it
idea.
also,
Just hilarious as well.
yeah, yeah, and it also spoke to this idea of well of like the facade of sort of like positive representation. You know, like all these people are pushing it, but they're not actually prepared to like put people on the
Yeah.
board or sacrifice their own positions on the basis that they
Yeah.
obviously enjoy a lot of power and control from these positions. And I thought, oh yeah, I think you're right. That joke did work really well, given how sort of you know simple it was. And I think
Yeah.
in the case of the film, a lot of the sort of more satirical elements are quite simple because the intention is to bring you right up to the sort of the face value of some of the
Yeah.
issues with that and the problems with this sort of idea of proclaiming to preach, and wanting equality, but not really doing anything other than like, making a doll that is apparently an author or something like that. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I
yeah.
agree. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think it sort of spoke to me. I think I've sort of touched this when we're talking about the through line through toy films, from Toy Story, Lego to Lego film to Barbie. I think it made me think about toys as symbols of hope and oppression.
Okay. Yeah.
Toys can be symbols of hope, and in the case of Barbie, I think she's got this very old fashioned idea. But I think America Ferrera's character, she has a really sort of like idealistic view of Barbie,
Yes. Yeah.
whereas it doesn't necessarily align with her daughter's view of Barbie.
Yeah.
And I've really made me think about that idea of how we sort of spoke about in the context of Toy Story, in the fact that toys represent the sort of social or historical changes, and the attitudes reflect those changes.
Yeah.
One of the key themes for me, alongside this critique of like corporate sort of twattery, for lack of a better term, I love saying that word,
Yeah.
but
Oh, that's great.
but it's also this idea of like how for one person a toy can mean one thing, it can mean this symbol of hope, but for others, in terms of the daughter, it can represent this sort of very reductive view of women that is ultimately damaging to any future progress that should be made. And I found that really interesting, that idea that Barbie can be both those things.
Yes. Yeah, it juggled with that. Really, it had a really great. I mean, at the beginning, the sort of weird 2001 sequence. There's a bit where it's like, obviously the dolls used to be babies, so it was the idea that you're preparing children for motherhood, and then that's changed. With Barbie, it was the introduction. With the best of intentions, perhaps it could have been like, no, we're gonna do away with that, and it's now going to be all about independence. But with that came the unrealistic expectations of beauty, which her mother wouldn't necessarily recognize, because she has such reverence for playing with these dolls, and she sort of only saw the positive sides. But then, as time wears on and generations, it kind of get older and are replaced with new generations, like you say, what these toys represent can change, and it does a really great job of that. It's planting the seed of an idea in your own mind of what your toys meant to you and what they might mean to your son, I guess, or daughter. Yeah, it's kind of that. That was a real strength of the film, I thought.
They can be emblematic of a disconnect, can't they?
Yeah.
And they can also be emblematic of this idea that that they don't necessarily have to uniformly represent one thing.
Yeah.
Because that in itself can create problems and expectations which aren't necessarily befitting for every single individual who might consume this particular product.
Yeah.
I just feel like Gerwig really handles all of these things really, really well, and it's a lot to take on, whilst sort of maintaining the visual sort of stylings you'd expect from a Barbie movie, but almost almost playing with those in a way that worked really, really well as well.
Oh yeah, there's some great gags at the beginning about like Barbie Land, and what the fact that there's no such thing as liquid really made me laugh. I don't really know why. They did a good job of that, of the production design as well. I thought was really, really commendable in that opening sequence, and yeah, just a good source of humor. I really liked as well, going back to America Ferrara, her character. There's a moment in it in which, without giving too much away, she's rallying her troops to kind of defeat the army of Kens who have kind of grown accustomed to the idea of patriarchy, and she just has this speech which could have been so preachy but wasn't at all. It was like it was a listing the various what's the word I'm looking for? The
Expectations
various
or
kind of
behaviors.
expectations, yeah, the kind of examples of inequality that women have faced over the years, and the way it's done, and her performance. That moment was so good. I was captivated. I was like, I want more of this list. Just in a way, so I can, looking forward, how I can be an ally. You know what I mean? I thought that it was a shame that it was kind of so brief. I thought, because I'd love to revisit that scene actually, and just kind of revisit that really long list of the kind of plight of being a woman, and how that can. And again, it's so strange talking to two white blokes talking about this kind of stuff, but I just thought it was fascinating, really interesting, and really, again, like want to stress this, not preachy. Like it didn't reduce anything in me anyway. I don't know what your thoughts were on that bit.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's very very similar. I didn't feel like attacked or anything.
No. Ben Shapiro did.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, that goes without saying, and that sort of leads to my
Yeah.
next point. Actually, is
Mm.
despite the film's overwhelming popularity, there does seem to be a growing contingent of people from familiar circles like that who have really
Mm.
taken issue with the movie.
Yeah.
I find that argument, I find that really fascinating, because these people, when they're like sticking up for comics or people that have said or done things that aren't sort of like in keeping with the current social climate, their response
Yeah.
is, well, if you don't like the comic stand up, don't watch it.
Yeah.
Don't engage with it. You don't have to. But then, as soon as something comes along that's critical of them, they willingly go and see it just so they can criticize it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and again, I don't want this to get too political,
No.
because But at the end of the day, I just find that really interesting, and I find that the film handles that quite well as well. That sort of,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I just think that particular that the sort of motivations of doing that, they don't really align with how they view things when they're basically. What I'm saying is, I think that people like that, I think, are more comfortable feeling that they're the ones that are being this sort of oppressed force. I think
Yes.
they
Yeah.
see,
Exactly. Mm.
when they're out of that territory, they seem to sort of struggle to find their feet and struggle to reflect that their argument is essentially redundant. Really, I don't know.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You're totally right. Yeah. Um. I have got. I'd like to read out Emily's opinions, if that's is this a
Yeah,
good time to do that?
yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
So
Hello, Emily.
yeah, just yeah. I said put stuff on Instagram, but she'd rather like just message. So here we go. So she's got three points. One is, it was an uplifting and fun movie, yet the poignant parts hit so hard. Greta was able to depict how every single woman has felt at some point in their life, and she managed to find the similarities we all share just by being a woman. It showed the struggles we have to face in the real world, whilst also making the point that Barbie has been somewhat hated for the past X amount of years because of the expectations she as a doll was setting. Barbie realizing she wasn't the idol she thought she was such a good part of the film. She now realizes it's not a dreamland, and that the struggles people face are embedded in society. So, yeah, I think that's sort of speaking. That's the first point she makes. I think that kind of speaks a little bit towards the kind of more existential side of the film,
Mm.
which I personally thought was slightly misplaced actually. But reading that, I kind of it makes a little bit more sense to me now. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think it speaks broader to the sort of the sort of humanity, the
Mm,
sort of focus on humanity, and how a lot of the sort of difficulties and struggles are emblematic of this collective struggle for humanity. I think that existential angle.
mm,
I agree that it's perhaps not as prominent as some of the other themes and ideas in the film, but I
yeah,
think this idea that her realization isn't. It's obviously she's terrified of that realization, but it's also there's good to be acknowledged as well in that realization, which I think is
Yeah.
well put by Emily.
Yeah. So number 2, despite the film showing the scary struggles women face, it was such a celebration of womanhood, and I've never felt happier to be a part of it. The fact that everyone has been getting involved in the celebrations by dressing up and going to see the film has been an amazing feeling. So that again, that's kind of talking a little bit more about the kind of real world, aka the world we live in,
Yeah.
the sort of the social side of going to see this film. Yeah, I think that is interesting. That a lot of people, there's so many people want to be a part of this, like what seems to be a real big event,
Yeah.
and it's so strange that it's come from Barbie, which I kind of reduced in my mind to like a a kid's doll. Right? I didn't think there was any nuance to it,
No,
but clearly there is.
I think it's created a sort of it reminds me of the positive elements of a shared cinema experience, right? I think
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me, when I sit in a cinema, 9 times out of 10, it's all about just engaging with the film. And
Mm,
I can probably get so so military about that I sort of forget that film can sometimes be a shared experience. And
yeah,
you're a community, and you're experiencing a film together.
yeah.
I think obviously there are films that do that better than others. Some films that's clearly not their intention. Oppenheimer,
No, yeah.
it's not saying bring your pipe and your hat and sit.
No.
It's
Yeah.
that doesn't need that. That's not the point of that movie. Whereas, like, if I
Yeah.
think about the last time I had an experience similar to Barbie's, we went to see Mandy, the Nicolas Cage film,
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
in the
Yeah.
watershed, actually, in the same screen, and it was like
Ah.
the strange thing to me was that it made me realize how great the collective shared experience of cinema viewing can be. I think Barbie has done it in a way that I can't think a film has done in a very long time. It's
Mm.
sort of like encouraging people to share the experience, but also, you walk around. I was actually in the city centre of Bristol yesterday, and you just knew who was going to see Barbie, and there was so many people. Like
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I just thought, wow, like, I mean, I didn't have, I wasn't, I don't have really that many negative things to say about the film. Even if you were, even then, you'd still have to acknowledge that there are a few films that have had this sort of impact.
Oh, yeah,
That,
yeah, completely.
in
Yeah.
terms of, again, like revitalizing that sort of the sort of collective wonderment of the shared experience of film
Mm.
watching. I don't know. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah,
Ramble.
I agree. No, not at all. No, I think the last example of it I can think of was actually kind of almost a toxic version of it, because it was stupid and encouraged disruption. That the Gru thing, the
Oh
minions
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
They're like gentle minions where everyone going in like in suits and stuff, but apparently like talked and like was just like chucking stuff at the screen. But in this case, it's a real positive thing, and it's also the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon. It's great because so much like different cinema goers and their different tastes are being catered for in one weekend,
yeah.
and that. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I went to the View at Cribs Causeway. It was packed,
Mm,
even for a Saturday. I
mm.
went both Saturday and Sunday. It was packed both days. The whole cinema was packed, but everyone was quiet whilst the film was. Apart from the the odd moments of laughter, I love that. I do, and it's easy to forget that when you go and see. Uh, a film that isn't so popular, where you're kind of sat amongst about 6 or 7 other slightly disinterested looking people. You forget that it can be so wonderful and so um just yeah, it's almost like going to a concert or something. And yeah, I totally, I think that's right. And I think, yeah, Emily's point about it was a celebration of womanhood, and she's never felt happier to be a part of it. It's the idea of being a part of something,
Yeah, yeah.
that's very much embedded in the sort of the social side of going to see this.
And it
So
doesn't
yeah,
alienate people either. I think, like, people who are really
yeah,
critical of the elements of this film, I think if you go, if they feel like it's an attack, a vehement attack on men to the point, you hate men. But if like, I mean, I've only been to one screening, but you end up, like, I didn't get, no one looked at you funny for being there. You know,
no,
yeah,
yeah, I went on my own, and it was fine. Like I felt very
you know what I
comfortable.
mean. So, like, it's about, again,
So,
it's
but
like sort of, all come in, all come and enjoy this. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is what it's about.
yeah,
And
mm,
I don't know, like, I don't really know how you could have like a negative view on that, really, to be honest.
yeah,
I don't
oh,
know.
completely, no. So finally, and this might be a good segue into discussing some of the weaker aspects of the film, actually.
Okay.
So she said, in my opinion, it wasn't as deep or complex as Greta's other films, but I don't think it needs to be. I think we needed a fun film that still gives an important message. Her other movies are both so beautiful and complicated, which I think some people had high expectations for this to be the same. But after much thought, I think it was perfect as it was. Look at the stats with how successful it's been in the first week, and that it was done by a woman. Barbie would be so proud. So there you go.
Well, okay. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think the complexity. I think at the end of the day, like, yeah, I give her praise for wrestling control for these corporate behemoths and managing to
Mm,
thread a level of complexity that I'd previously written off.
yeah,
But I think the reality is this is still a blockbuster movie, and I think uh,
yeah,
her previous two efforts are significantly cheaper,
yes,
and with
yeah,
that comes a great level of creative freedom. And I would agree
mm,
with her that the complexity is obviously vastly lacking in
yeah.
comparison to her independent efforts, but that isn't a reflection of her as a filmmaker, more of a reflection, I think, to adapt your stylings to work with
Oh yeah,
within a far bigger budget. So
oh yeah. You don't want to alienate what is clearly going to be a broader audience. I mean, even if it hadn't as done as well as it had, the audience it would have drawn in would have been different to Little Women or Lady Bird, right? I
yeah,
mean, like her name, Greta Gerwig's name, isn't like big, bright and colourful center on the posters. You know, it's not like a Nolan film anyway. And so you do have to, you're gonna have to make
concessions.
some. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, the other, I'm trying to think, like there was a couple of sort of plot based and the way they things about Barbie which I thought were slightly weak. The bizarre. I don't know whether I just didn't get the joke, but the way that the transitioning between the Barbie land and the real world, I thought that was really odd. Like I didn't really understand how you could transition from one to the other, and there wasn't. I know the film isn't concerned with building a world like a kind of, there's no portal or anything, but I don't know. I thought there could have been something a little bit more explained in that regard. So I'm like, okay, well, how do you get from there to there?
yeah.
Like what? I was a bit confused by that. And yeah, I felt they could have handled that a bit better,
I thought
actually.
the mid act was the weakest part of the movie. Following from
Oh, okay.
that.
Yeah.
I think once the Ken and Barbie have their resulting realizations that impact, their world when they return back, I think it
Yeah.
sort of overstayed its welcome a little bit.
Mm,
And I thought there were
okay.
elements,
Yeah.
even though I think Will Ferrell was well cast in the film, I think it almost veered into more like Will Ferrell comedy territory a little bit.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah.
Which again, I'm not necessarily saying is no overt criticism, but given that I think Gerwig's and Baumbach's styling is so of its own, I felt that it sort of there's a bit of a conflict of a comedic conflict, shall we say? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I mean,
Mm.
again, that's a sort of a minor gripe, but I think it was something that definitely impacted my. I wouldn't say my enjoyment per se, but it left me thinking that middle section. I was, when they went back to Barbie Land, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say on
Mm.
this podcast. When they go back to Barbie
Yeah.
Land, I think it drastically improved and went back to that
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
that sort of it channeled the best energy of some of the best campy musicals. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Ken's musical element, I thought was fantastic. Actually, my
Yeah.
appreciation
Yeah.
for musicals has only increased as I've got older, and I don't know, like I've always got a bit of a soft spot for a good musical number, especially when it's Ryan Gosling, who I think is at the absolute peak of his comedy powers here. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
he's the standout performer in the movie for me by a country mile. I think he
Mm.
builds on his comedic ability that he showed in like The Nice Guys. I thought he was like really good in that in terms of a comedy
Oh
actor.
yeah. Yeah. Of
But
course.
the way
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
sort of plays that, the sort of
Sort of lovesick guy, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
the sort of one-dimensional lovesick dope, and then has this sort of reverse moral reawakening when he goes to the real world, and the way those two things are in conflict with each other when he comes back to Barbie Land, I just think is hilarious, and I think he deserves,
Yeah.
consider. I mean, a few people have been saying this is his best ever performance,
Oh really? Oh, wow.
which I think is quite funny. I mean, I don't know if that's true necessarily, but in terms of a comedic performance, I guess you have to value comedic performances like everything else. So
Yeah. Oh yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I think he really stole the show in the film, actually.
I admire him greatly for not shying away from a role like this, because it could be, especially on paper, like it's going to be, that's a tough sell, especially to someone like Ryan Gosling, who's an established serious actor. Like he's had, like you say, he's done comedic performances in the past, but he's also done like Place Beyond the Pines. He's done Drive. He's established a reputation as being someone who chooses his roles carefully, and I think it's interesting that he saw something in this, and he saw something that he can contribute to, and he does it. Like I agree, does a fantastic job of playing this guy.
Yeah, he really does, and I think it's the appeal of Gerwig. I think had you got like a more sort of like, I don't know, and I'm trying to think, like if you'd gone the Marvel approach, for example, this
Yeah.
I just don't think the film would have had the appeal. I think
No, yeah,
Gerwig's name brings an appeal,
yeah.
and I think without that you wouldn't have had half as many of the sort of stellar performers in the film without her. I don't think.
No, yeah,
I've got
definitely.
a few comments I'd like to read from you on Instagram.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, yeah.
Again, I went from Barbie, yay or nay.
Mm.
Alfie said, yay, best experience I've had in the cinema for a very long time. Laugh out loud and very moving.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Jordana again, yay. Its message is very much on the nose, but it's a great way to get it across to a younger audience too.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Alex, from the film angle, get away you. Mostly Gerwig gets to say something with a project that could have easily been soulless. And then finally, Dear Jess says, yay, loved it so much. I thought they couldn't have nailed the subject any better, and I did not expect to cry so much. If I'd been
Wow.
another, whoa, it would have been even more so. Also, I walked away wanting a rewatch instantly. So many great
Ah.
references and more I would have missed.
Mm.
So, it seems to be, again, not necessarily a microcosm. And
Yeah.
it's interesting that people talk about the critical elements of the film, about being on the nose.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I can understand that, but I think on the basis that this is a blockbuster movie, and again goes back to what we were saying about the sort of, you have to shave off a bit of that depth for a blockbuster. I think that's just something you sort of have to, I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah.
accept. Um,
Yeah. No, I agree.
I think I'd be more critical of it if it was more misguided, or if it was handled with lesser tact,
Mm.
or other elements of the film were handled with lesser tact. I think that would invite a greater level of criticism.
Yeah.
And I think there is an argument there to say it might be a little bit up front.
Mm.
But I think given that the film is very much about being upfront, it seems a bit reductive
Yeah.
to criticise it too much on that front. What do you think of Margot Robbie? We've not talked about her.
Oh yeah, no, I did like her, and I thought she was very well cast. There's a great joke in it about it's about like how she doesn't feel beautiful, and then Helen Mirren chimes in. She's like, if you want to make this point, it's very meta. Yeah. If you want to make this, yeah, she says, if you want to make this point, don't cast Margot Robbie as your lead. I thought that was very very true, because she's clearly a very very beautiful and very sort of traditionally beautiful actor, and I mean, she was. I don't think it's her finest hour at all, but I thought she was well suited to it, and that's, I can't really say much more. I do think she's a good crier. She
Mm,
cries a lot in Barbie, and it's funny going back to what some of the comments there, in that a lot of people thought it was emotional. I didn't actually get it. I thought the emotional moments. I mean, maybe this speaks to the fact that I went to see it on my own. Um, I didn't think. I thought they were a bit much. I thought it actually leaned too heavily into that element, and if it brought it back a little bit, it would have been a better film for it. But I think I might be on my own in that opinion, perhaps.
mm.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think again, it just boils back to that sort of, everything's dialed up to 11, isn't it? Just personally, if I think about Gerwig's other work, I prefer the spaces in between for the emotional impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, a film of this magnitude doesn't have many spaces in between. So,
No. No.
I kind of agree. I kind of get where you're coming from. But then maybe I just lack the reference point as well. Maybe.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Did you like did you like Margot Robbie in this as well? Do you think she
Yeah,
was?
yeah. Again, I don't think it's her finest hour necessarily, but
Yeah.
I think she plays the role. I think the demands of the role, given that the film has a very sort of, as you say, meta edge to it, I think she does that really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not the
No.
standout performer, but I think she, is definitely up there. So,
Yeah, that's true. Um, I did like her in it ultimately, and I actually can't see anyone else in the role. So
Yeah, that's true.
that
That is
yeah,
true.
I don't know who else I would have personally cast if I was involved in the production of this movie. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I have something, just sort of a question that developed to pitch to you, and I pitched this on our Instagram as well.
yeah.
So this is a bit more cynical.
Okay, go on. Yeah, yeah.
There's a cynical avenue here. So upon doing sort of research for this episode,
Yeah.
I came across articles and YouTube videos from like clips from like news channels about
Mm,
people debating the worth of this critique, the worth of this sort of critique. You know, the things we've talked about. The critique of patriarchy or hypermasculinity, or and the critique of like corporate power and how
yeah.
corporate power sort of like weaponizes social progress to maximize profit, etc., etc.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
a few people aren't convinced by that critique, uh,
Wow.
given the fact that this film is not only made by Warner Brothers, but it's also
Mm,
co-produced by Mattel, both companies that probably will see a significant investment on the back of this film.
mm. Oh yeah.
And an argument, and I think a semi-legit argument has been leveled to them in the sense that, well, if this film is a critique of that corporate power, all this film is doing is giving them more power. When you hand over when you tap your bank card or you pay, you're
Yeah.
empowering the company. You're empowering the trajectory of the company and what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay.
And as I started to think about that more, I began to think about the idea of like how corporations market themselves and want themselves to be seen. And
Yeah.
whilst I'm sort of largely complimentary of Gerwig's critique of that sort of corporate power, I do wonder like how much these figureheads have to lose, because ultimately they're
Mm,
being mocked. The idea of corporate power, predominantly masculine corporate power, it's mocked more as a concept than it is specifically.
yeah.
And that broad critique, I don't think people in these high ranking positions are going to be too fussed by that, because they get to facilitate this fantasy that people have, the fantasy of seeing these people being answerable for whatever it is they're doing that is an issue,
Yeah.
um, answerable for the fact they don't really respect the plight of the people, of the consumer, answerable in the fact that, given the current climate at the moment, particularly with all of the writers strikes and the actors
Yep.
strikes,
Mm,
they clearly don't care about the people who put the hard yards in to make these things. By sort of facilitating this fantasy that they are being criticized, they're actually not. They've managed to monetize a subversive attitude to their own practice.
yeah.
And I think that speaks more broadly to not just Gerwig. I mean, I don't think it's an argument to be laid at Gerwig's feet at all, like
No,
entirely.
no, no.
But I
Yeah.
think the fact that the film is so so overt in its critique of these things, I think that's why people have brought it up in that way. I just wondered what you thought about that, and if it ultimately derails any of the sort of more enjoyable elements of the film.
There was a moment where I really did think that, and it was the introduction of Mattel as a kind of an entity, an artifact in the film itself. And I remember thinking at that moment, "Hey, their logo is at the start of this movie after Warner Brothers." And I was like, I don't really know how to think about it, because it's going in circles, isn't it? It's like I don't think we'll ever know, really. Unfortunately, I know that might not be the answer you're after, but it will. The idea that being subversive can become a product in itself. What happens if you made a film about that concept and that film makes money? You know what I mean? It's a circle.
Mm,
All it will do is go round in circles, because if you make a film and you want it to be seen, then people are going to naturally, unless you put it out for free, but then it will become more of a like an art piece, like an art gallery thing.
mm,
And ultimately, the nature of cinema is that it's not the same as like a shop or an art gallery where you can just go in and admire the paintings for free. It is a product, and it's a product to be sold, and someone, you're lining someone's pockets no matter who that is. And so I think, I do think that they're being mocked, but they're being mocked at our expense, and that is slightly troubling to me. Do you know what I mean? It's not at their expense at all. They're like, laughing all the way to the bank, and if that's what it takes for them, like I don't think it's it's confusing, and there's a big circle that is just going to go on and on and on. Like eventually, someone will make a film about hopefully someone will make a film about the cyclical nature of it all. Maybe me. I'll think about it once I've done my German sniper film.
yeah. Anderson's still not picking up the phone, is he? That's a shame.
No.
No, I think it's interesting. Obviously, mainstream American cinema it was a capitalist venture. It is it is a venture that it sells. I mean, for a long time, obviously, it's undergone various iterations as culture and has changed, and history has impacted these changes. But fundamentally, it was people going out into the sort of the sort of barren desert, and creating a space that could sell the American dream. And integral to the American dream is the same system, albeit quite different. But fundamentally, the same profit obsessed system that we live in now. So I think it's. I don't think it's particularly clever to sort of just level this at the Barbie movie. I think every one of the. I mean, again, this is probably getting a bit political, and I'm showing a bit more of my sort of, my own political viewpoint. But fundamentally, the economic system we live under, it has managed to even monetize subversion, which I think is problematic. And it is sad because the only people that gain from this subversion, people vote with their wallet. That expression, do you know what I mean? Like, and we've spoken before about temporary moral realignments. At the end of the day, all of us in Western society, are we think a certain way, but we behave in a different way with our wallet, in a way we don't even really acknowledge. And and I think it does say something about that. And I don't want to derail my enjoyment for the film too much, because I think, again, it's harsh to level that at the feet of Gerwig, or indeed the sort of the wonderful sort of in cinema communities that come and watch the film. They genuinely want to enjoy the movie. They genuinely want to be bowled over by the messages of the film, which are positive, But this isn't just men saying this. This is like people whose political beliefs don't align with the current system we live in, and they're making the criticism on the basis of Barbie as something that is critical about the powers that be. Their argument is, well, this film is only going to uphold the powers that be, and indeed the problems that come with maintaining those people in power. So, again, I think this has all got a bit lofty for Cinevoice to Cinema.
No.
I just found it really interesting in that context. Particularly more pertinent in the current economic situation we find ourselves in, and particularly more prescient in the sense of all, as I said before, the strikes and the fact that all of the some of the most talented people in the industry are being treated so terribly and being paid so terribly. Continue the sort of the sort of the industry and the wonder that it sort of sells and profits from.
Completely.
It's interesting
I
point.
think you're right.
I had some comments about it actually, because I was intrigued to see what people thought, because by and large people have just been so bowled over by the sort of the elements we've sort of discussed and more, the bits we've missed. But I was really intrigued to hear what people say about this. So I basically said, my question was basically, do you feel that element, the fact that the money's basically going the wrong way, undermines any of the key messages of the film, but particularly the sort of the anti-corporate stance? Adopts pretty explicitly. So it's the same people, but Alex says undermines it, but when the general message feels like it came from a human like Greta, it gets a pass.
Okay, heart's in the right place.
It seems largely unavoidable in the current cinematic landscape. From Alfie, but then he follows it with, but yeah, sure, maybe undercuts the message to a degree. Jordana also chimes in once more. Good to have you here with us throughout both episodes. She said, no, if anything, we need corporate to keep the film industry alive at this point, seeing how cinemas are dying.
Wow.
Which I think sort of takes into account the idea that, for all of our sort of grievances about that, or the grievances of the people that are critical about that aspect,
Yeah.
how else would they survive in this current system?
Yeah.
Which I guess has some truth to it. What I would argue, maybe perhaps as a counterpoint to that, is the strikes are emblematic of an idea that perhaps corporations aren't that bothered about preserving the art form of cinema as
Well, no,
much.
yeah, this was definitely a wealth inequality thing there.
Yeah,
But I could definitely see what they're saying is, if you want to keep going to the cinema, if you want to keep the dream alive, then you're going to have to some extent bow to the powers that be that make it happen, and responsible for the funding, and able to give Greta Gerwig $145 million to make a film like this. So I suppose, yeah, that's very true.
and finally, it just says, no, all the marketing and profit gain is so clearly on the table for these companies that if you are being exploited, and totally fair enough if you want to participate. If anything, I love seeing everyone dress up in their merchandise for the film. I mean, I can't remember the last time, if ever, I've ever witnessed a film with that kind of draw. So I really enjoyed
Well,
it
yeah.
and thought this is a moment to remember for the cinemas.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and largely due to the pairing with Oppenheimer as well. That is largely an internet creation as well.
Mm,
We've got to remember that side of the marketing was not necessarily, unless there's someone very clever working in marketing, was not started by Warner Brothers or Mattel or Universal. It was something that was born out of the masses,
mm.
which has contributed to the success of the film, and paradoxically has probably made both films a lot more money than they would otherwise have probably made.
Yeah,
Like I fucking hell, Oppenheimer wouldn't have opened to 80 million if it wasn't for Barbie. Definitely not a chance in hell. It would have made. But it would have made some decent cash. Nolan can definitely stand on his own, but I really do think that the profits from both of these films are largely due to the presence of the other one.
yeah, I think you're probably right.
Mm.
And I think just to sort of
Mm.
touch back on that point, I think this is sort of shifting away a bit from Barbie, but the idea of, I think we should always be suspicious of corporations, particularly big ones,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think that's becoming all the more noticeable in the current landscape.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially the way that these corporations, particularly within the realms of TV and film, and their and the way they free fell into streaming, it has
Yeah.
impacted the cinema, and I think they do have a large part of the blame. They should shoulder a large part of the blame for that. And the
Yeah.
refusal to is emblematic of a wider issue in society. However,
Yeah, yeah.
again, I want to stress that I'm not. At the end of the day, I'm, as Alfie also said, I forgot to, filmmaking is a corporate endeavor.
Yeah.
Even the smallest movies rely on corporate investment, and it's a medium I
Yeah.
love and I adore. And I think in the current landscape, it's a trade off that's worthwhile, because if I didn't
Mm.
engage with it, then how would I engage with anything? I mean, everything that is sold to a wide audience. Obviously, the internet has changed things quite a lot, but fundamentally, if you still want to get something that's seen by a mass audience, you have to go through those channels, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily reflective of you necessarily selling out.
Yeah. No.
I don't think. I mean, don't be wrong. There are definitely examples of people that have in
Yeah.
more overt terms, but I don't think Gerwig necessarily deserves that criticism. I
No.
just thought it was interesting to talk about in that context, because it wasn't something that I'd actually considered
Yeah.
until
No.
I'd seen, I think, which are valid criticisms.
Yeah.
I just think that it's sort of strange to me that it's all around Barbie, but it also makes
Yeah.
sense given the popularity of the film and, of course, the toys themselves um,
Mm.
as representations
Yeah.
of industry, I guess. But yeah, interesting.
Mm.
Just a point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, completely. Yeah, and I like that. Yeah. Well, I don't like it. It's just it's sort of nightmarish to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is.
Slightly existential as
Yeah,
well. But I mean, I'm not gonna. My DVD collection isn't comprised of exclusively of public domain films,
yeah.
as much as I'd like it to
Well, yeah, I mean,
be. Well,
yeah. The criticism, that they leveled, I sort of thought, yeah, and I sort of thought about it, but then, yeah, like you say, we're all products of it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily always mean that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, we are part of that
mm,
system, and to enjoy
mm,
what we want to enjoy, we have to sort of, in some way, embrace that. And
yeah,
that might be something, that there might be something more to think about in a future episode, maybe, and and the channels in which people may get around that. But again, this is about Barbie and Ken, not about my sort of brainless sort of political musing.
No. It's good. It's good to bring that up for sure, because it is fascinating and a very cyclical, unresolvable matter.
Yeah. I'm not sleeping tonight. Now I'm
Nice.
gonna lie in bed, just feel like a piece of shit. Yes. Outro.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it then. A sort of long discussion about Barbie, Ken, Greta Gerwig, Toy Story, Small Soldiers, and the politics, Michael Bay, and the politics around consumerism.
Yeah.
Typically,
wow, that's hefty.
hefty, rudderless stuff from the Cineboys. Next week, we are going to do the first of our hopefully many director deep dive episodes.
Yes.
So what we'll do is we're going to hash out like a cluster of directors, and then we'll try and sort of spin a wheel or something, perhaps live on the Instagram. We're slaves to social media now, so and what what you want. But no, we might sort of try and sort of randomize it, and then from there go and research the body of work, and then come back with an episode. I think that'd be quite an interesting approach, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think I'm really up for that. It'd be good fun. Nice.
So maybe if we put out a list of directors, or maybe if we do a couple each, and then the beloved listeners can come up with their own.
All right, then. Nice. Yeah.
And then we'll so we go from there. But in the meantime, enjoy this episode. Another short hiatus, perhaps for another week. Ben's on another holiday.
Part-timer.
Unbelievable. No, enjoy it, mate. And but in the meantime, guys, you enjoy these two mammoth episodes.
Yeah. Take care, guys. See you
later.
later.
Love you lots. See you later. Bye-bye.